There's something in the air these last few days of February that feels slower, softer, more interior than usual. Elise Chandler, a spiritual guide who has tracked Mercury's cycles for over 2 decades, calls this particular retrograde the one that speaks in feelings before it speaks in words. If quiet, thoughtful reflections help you feel less alone in what you're sensing, you belong here. There's something specific happening between 26 February and March 20th, and most people are living right through it without recognizing what it's asking of them. Why February 26 feels spiritually different this year? The morning of February 26th carries a particular texture, not dramatic, not alarming, just noticeably interior. Mercury retrograde beginning in Pisces, the most emotionally porous sign in the zodiac, is less like a disruption and more like a tide pulling inward. In human terms, Pisces governs the things we feel but cannot easily say. Grief held quietly, love not fully expressed, questions about meaning that surface only in private moments. When Mercury, the planet of communication and thought, moves backward through this water, the inner world becomes louder than the outer one. Elise Chandler describes this particular retrograde as unusually personal compared to others. Most Mercury retrogrades bring communication glitches, travel delays, and contract confusion, the practical frustrations people warn each other about online. But a retrograde in Pisces operates differently. It doesn't primarily target your schedule or your inbox. It targets your inner narrative, the story you've been telling yourself about why things happened the way they did. And it gently, persistently, begins asking whether that story is still serving you. What makes February 26th feel distinct this year is that it arrives during a season when many people are already in a reflective mood. Winter still holding, the New Year's energy beginning to settle. The retrograde doesn't create that mood, it finds it already present and deepens it. People who are sensitive to energetic shifts often describe noticing a change in the quality of their thinking around this date. Not slower exactly, but more layered, more willing to revisit what was previously moved past too quickly. The symptom most people mistake for anxiety. There is a familiar feeling that surfaces during these weeks, a low hum of restlessness that sits in the chest rather than the mind. Many people reach immediately for an explanation. Too much coffee, not enough sleep, something worrying about the news, without considering that what they are experiencing might not be anxiety at all. It might be the particular sensation of emotional material rising to the surface after a long time submerged. The body knows the difference, even when the mind hasn't caught up. The distinction matters, and it's worth sitting with. True anxiety tends to pull a person toward the future, catastrophizing, planning defensively, scanning for threat. What Mercury retrograde in Pisces tends to produce is something that pulls in the opposite direction, toward the past, toward unfinished emotional business, toward relationships and experiences that were never fully processed. The restlessness isn't warning you about what's coming. It's pointing towards something that has been waiting, patiently, to be noticed. Spiritual teachers and grief counselors alike have observed this pattern, a surge of unnamed emotional awareness that people initially misread as dysfunction. One useful way to tell the difference is this: if the feeling softens when you sit quietly and let it arrive, it is likely something rising toward resolution, not something spiraling away from it. Anxiety tightens when you face it. This particular sensation tends to ease, as though it simply needed to be acknowledged before it could begin to move. Take one slow breath right now, and notice if there's anything you've been carrying lately that doesn't quite have a name yet. Not a problem, not a worry, just something present, just beneath the surface. You don't need to solve it or explain it tonight. Mercury retrograde in Pisces has a way of asking us simply to notice what's there. And sometimes, that noticing alone is the beginning of something quietly significant. Let that sit with you for just a moment before we continue. Pisces pulls old emotions back to surface. Imagine a lake in late winter, ice beginning to soften at the edges, things that had settled to the bottom starting to shift as the water changes temperature. Pisces, in its deepest nature, is that lake. It holds everything: memories, dreams, unspoken words, love that was never fully delivered. When Mercury moves through this territory in reverse, it stirs what has settled, not to disturb, but to offer a second chance to look at what was left behind. Elise Chandler has noted something specific about emotions that return during this window. They rarely arrive the same way they left. A grief that was sharp when it happened may return with a softer edge, more like longing than pain. A conversation that felt impossible to revisit may suddenly feel not only possible, but necessary. This is one of the quieter gifts of a Pisces retrograde. It changes the emotional temperature of old material just enough for it to be handled in a new way. What felt like a locked door may now simply be a door. The behavior shift people notice most often during this period is a softening of ordinary defenses. People who describe themselves as private suddenly find themselves writing more, talking more openly with people they trust, reaching out to someone they'd been meaning to contact for months. It is as though the usual reasons for holding back, timing, pride, uncertainty, lose some of their weight. And in that lightening, something that needed to move finally does. As we go deeper into this video, there is a particular symptom of this retrograde that lives in the body rather than the mind. And it turns out to be one of the most reliable signals that something meaningful is being processed without your conscious awareness. Dreams become unusually vivid and specific. You wake up at 3 a.m. from a dream that felt more like a visit than a vision. And for a moment, the person in the dream felt present in a way that is hard to describe in daylight. During Mercury retrograde in Pisces, the dreaming mind becomes notably more active, and the dreams themselves take on a quality that researchers in sleep science call hyperassociative. The brain is drawing connections between things it would normally keep separate. Old relationships, unfinished conversations, places from the past. They arrive with unusual color and emotional weight. The reason Pisces amplifies dream activity has to do with its relationship to the unconscious mind. Pisces is considered the sign most naturally connected to what lives beneath awareness. Intuition, symbolic thinking, the part of the person that processes emotion through image rather than language. When Mercury, the planet of the thinking mind, retreats into Pisces, it temporarily loosens the grip of rational thought and allows the symbolic, dreaming mind more room to speak. The result is a kind of overnight emotional housekeeping that the waking mind can sometimes catch in those early morning moments. What is worth noting is how specific these dreams tend to be, not the scattered, surreal imagery of ordinary dreaming, but particular faces, particular rooms, particular phrases spoken clearly. People who keep a notebook on their nightstand during this period often find that the themes appearing in their dreams correspond precisely to the emotional material they've been avoiding in waking life. The dreaming mind, it seems, has its own sense of what needs attending to, and Mercury retrograde in Pisces gives it more room to be direct. Conversations you avoided finally ask to happen. There is a particular kind of message that sits in someone's drafts folder for weeks, composed, reconsidered, never sent. Or a phone call that keeps being postponed, not because the person doesn't want to make it, but because the timing never feels right. During this retrograde window, something changes. The postponed conversation begins to press. Not loudly. Mercury in Pisces is never loud, but with a quiet insistence that is harder to dismiss each day that passes. Elise Chandler describes this as one of the most tender qualities of this particular retrograde. The conversations it invites are rarely the confrontational kind. They are more often the vulnerable kind, the "I've been thinking of you" message, the overdue "I'm sorry," the long-avoided "I need to tell you something I never said." Pisces governs compassion, and Mercury retrograde here tends to strip away the pride and the protective distance that usually keep those messages unsent. What remains is just the honest feeling, looking for a way forward. The surprising thing that people report after finally having these conversations, or sending the long-delayed message, is not relief exactly. It's something quieter and stranger than relief, a sense of rightness, as though the conversation had already been waiting in some completed form, and what the person did was simply allow it to arrive. Whether it is received warmly or not, the act of honest expression during this period tends to carry a weight of meaning that is difficult to put into words, but impossible not to feel. The quiet sign, your intuition, is sharpening. Something small happens during these weeks that most people dismiss as coincidence. You think of someone and they call. You sense that a situation is off before any evidence arrives. You wake up knowing something you didn't know the night before, not from a dream you remember, but from a quality of certainty that simply wasn't present yesterday. These moments are easy to wave away in ordinary times. During Mercury retrograde in Pisces, they tend to cluster, and people begin to notice the cluster. Intuition, the capacity to perceive beyond what is immediately visible, is not a mystical special ability reserved for a few people. Researchers in cognitive science have been studying it for decades, and what emerges is that intuition is largely the brain processing vast amounts of stored pattern data below conscious awareness and surfacing a conclusion before the reasoning mind has caught up. Pisces, in its symbolic nature, governs exactly this kind of perception, and when Mercury retreats through it, the usual dominance of linear logical thinking softens just enough for those quieter signals to be heard. The concrete behavior shift people notice is a greater willingness to trust a feeling without immediately requiring a reason. This is not carelessness. It is a different mode of knowing that many people have been trained out of. During these 23 days, some people describe making a decision based on a sense they couldn't fully explain, and discovering later that the sense was right. Not always, but with a frequency that begins to feel less like luck and more like a faculty that had been quietly waiting for permission to be used. 3 things people commonly notice between February 26th and March 20th that they rarely talk about. 1. Old photographs seem to find their way into your hands without you looking for them. 2. Music from earlier chapters of your life suddenly sounds different, as though it carries a message it wasn't ready to deliver the first time you heard it. 3. The desire to simplify, to cancel plans, to sit quietly, to spend an evening doing very little, arrives not as laziness, but as something that feels almost like instruction. Something lost in the past wants returning. There's a word in Portuguese, saudade, that describes a longing for something beloved that is gone, mixed with gratitude that it existed at all. It is one of the most human feelings there is, and it surfaces with unusual frequency during Mercury retrograde in Pisces. Not grief in its raw form, but something softer, a tender awareness of what was, who you were, what mattered in a chapter of life that has since closed. This retrograde has a particular fondness for calling that feeling forward. What makes this emotionally productive rather than simply nostalgic is the quality of attention it invites. Nostalgia tends to idealize, to smooth away the difficulty and remember only the warmth. What Mercury retrograde in Pisces tends to produce is more honest than that. People find themselves remembering not just the good of a past relationship or chapter, but the full complexity of it. and arriving, sometimes unexpectedly, at a kind of acceptance they had never quite reached. The past isn't offering a return, it's offering a completion. A surprising behavior shift during this period is the impulse to locate things. Old letters, old journals, a photograph tucked in a drawer, a book someone gave you long ago. People describe going looking for something entirely practical and finding something they didn't know they needed. The search and the finding feel connected in a way that is hard to attribute entirely to chance, as though the objects themselves have been quietly waiting for this particular window to make themselves findable again. Why silence feels louder than usual now. You turn off the television, and the quiet that arrives is different from usual. Fuller somehow, more inhabited. People who spend these retrograde weeks in more than their ordinary silence often describe the experience as one of the most unexpectedly rich periods they have known. Not because anything dramatic happens in the silence, but because the silence itself seems to carry more. More texture, more invitation, more of whatever the noise ordinarily drowns out. In acoustic terms, silence is never truly empty. It is simply the absence of competition. What we call silence is actually the presence of sounds we are not usually attentive enough to hear. The settling of a house, the particular quality of winter air, the rhythm of our own breathing. During Mercury retrograde in Pisces, people report becoming newly attuned to these subtleties, not as something they trained themselves to do, but as something that seemed to happen on its own, as though perception itself had become more finely tuned. Spiritual traditions across many cultures have long associated this kind of heightened interior sensitivity with periods of inward movement, times when the soul, as various teachers have put it, is doing more of its work below the surface than above it. Whether or not one uses that language, the experience itself is widely reported and worth taking seriously. The silence feels louder because more is being heard within it, and what is being heard from many people during these weeks has been trying to make itself known for a very long time. The 23 days that quietly rewire your inner world. 23 days is an unusual amount of time, long enough to change a habit, short enough to feel like a season within a season. From February 26th to March 20th, people who pay attention tend to notice that something about them is different at the end than at the beginning. Not dramatically, not in a way they could easily point to in the mirror, but in the way they hold a memory, or the way a particular anxiety that was always present seems to have quietly loosened its grip. The mechanism behind this is genuinely interesting to both spiritual teachers and behavioral scientists. Any sustained period of heightened self-reflection, of dreams, of emotional surfacing, of quieter daily rhythm, produces measurable changes in how the brain organizes experience. Neural pathways associated with rumination can be gently redirected when the reflective process is allowed to complete itself, rather than being interrupted by the usual forward momentum of busy life. Mercury retrograde, whatever its cosmological reality, functions in human experience as precisely this kind of pause. What people tend to underestimate is how much inner reorganization happens without their conscious participation. They go about their days, they drink their tea, take their walks, speak with their families, and somewhere beneath all of that, a quiet sorting is occurring. Old material being filed differently, new understandings settling into place. The rewiring is not something you do, it is something you allow. And the 23 days between now and March 20th are, for many people, exactly the right container for it to happen in. There is something worth noting about the people who resist this period of inner rewiring, who fill every quiet moment with noise, who keep the schedule full, who treat the retrograde like an inconvenience to be pushed through, rather than a current to move with. They tend to arrive at March 20th feeling vaguely unresolved, as though something was knocking and they kept not answering the door. The rewiring does not force itself. It simply offers a window, and the window has a closing date. What makes this particular 23-day period valuable is not that it demands anything dramatic from you, only that you remain a little more available to yourself than usual. Memories surface that carry unfinished feeling. A memory arrives without warning while you're doing something entirely ordinary, washing dishes, folding a blanket, walking to the end of the driveway. It doesn't announce itself. It simply appears, with a vividness and emotional weight that feels disproportionate to what it is. A moment from years ago, a face, a particular afternoon, a thing said or unsaid, and it lingers longer than memories usually do, as though it is waiting for something from you. What makes certain memories unfinished in a psychological sense is not necessarily that they were traumatic. Often, they were simply interrupted. A relationship that ended without the conversation it needed. A moment of meaning that passed too quickly to be fully received. A decision made under pressure that was never properly grieved. These memories return during Pisces retrograde because the energetic conditions are unusually hospitable to them. The inner waters are warmer. The usual defenses softer. The capacity for emotional honesty higher than at other times of year. The most useful thing a person can do when one of these memories surfaces is simply to let it be present for a moment longer than usual. Not to analyze it immediately, not to push it away, not to decide what it means, just to sit with it the way you might sit with an old friend who has arrived unexpectedly. People who do this often find that the memory delivers something on its own. A feeling of resolution, a belated understanding, a small release that the ordinary forward rush of life never quite created the space for. What is quietly remarkable about the memories that surface during this retrograde is that they tend to arrive in a particular order, not chronologically, but emotionally. The ones that carry the most unfinished weight tend to come first, as though the inner world has its own sense of priority and triage. A memory from last year may arrive before one from decades ago, simply because it holds more that is still unresolved. And as each one is met with a little more patience and a little less resistance, the ones that follow tend to arrive more gently, as though the process itself is learning how much you can receive and calibrating accordingly. Your body notices before your mind does. Something is happening in the neck and shoulders of a great many people right now. A heaviness that isn't quite muscle tension, a tiredness that a good night's sleep doesn't entirely resolve. The body responds to energetic and emotional shifts before the conscious mind has processed them. And Mercury retrograde in Pisces is known among those who track such things for producing a particular kind of physical heaviness that is less about illness and more about the weight of what is being inwardly processed. Traditional healing systems from cultures around the world, Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and others, have long mapped the relationship between emotional holding and physical sensation. Unexpressed grief is said to settle in the lungs and chest. Unspoken words create tension in the throat and jaw. These observations, while not always confirmed in the language of Western medicine, align with what many people experience and report, that their body knows, before they do, that something significant is moving through them. During this retrograde, paying attention to where the body holds its quiet weight can be a form of useful self-knowledge. The behavior shift worth noticing is a spontaneous inclination toward gentleness with oneself. More rest, less pushing, more warmth sought and accepted. People who honor this inclination tend to move through the retrograde with greater ease. Those who resist it, who insist on maintaining the same pace of productivity and external engagement, often find the symptoms amplify. The body is not malfunctioning during these weeks. It is, in its own way, cooperating with a process that the mind hasn't fully caught up with yet. There is one more physical signal worth mentioning that tends to appear during this particular retrograde, a heightened sensitivity to sound, light, and even the energy of crowded spaces. People who are ordinarily comfortable in busy environments find themselves preferring quieter ones. Grocery stores feel louder. Conversations feel more draining. This is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that the nervous system is directing its resources inward, the way a plant pulls its energy to its roots before new growth begins. Honoring that inward pull, rather than overriding it, tends to make the entire retrograde period feel more manageable and unexpectedly more meaningful. What completes itself before March 20th ends? There is a particular kind of ending that doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like something settling, the way a long exhale finally completes itself after being held a little too long. By the time Mercury stations direct on March 20th, which also happens to be the equinox, the first day of spring in the northern hemisphere, something will have shifted for most people who allowed themselves to be present during these weeks. Not everything, perhaps not the thing they expected, but something real and something ready. The coincidence of the retrograde ending on the spring equinox is one that spiritual observers across many traditions find meaningful. Equinox itself marks a moment of perfect balance, day and night held in equal measure, before the tipping point toward more light. Mercury going direct on this same day creates a layered quality of completion, the inward journey of the retrograde meeting the outward invitation of spring, both arriving on the same morning. What has been processed in the interior is handed gently back to the world. What tends to complete itself during these 23 days is rarely the thing a person was consciously working on. It tends to be something older, a question that predates the retrograde by years, an emotional understanding that had been slowly building without the person realizing it. And when it completes, it does so quietly, without announcement. A person simply notices, one morning in mid-March, that they feel differently about something they had carried for a long time. Lighter. Not because anything external changed, but because something internal, finally, arrived at its own conclusion. And perhaps the most overlooked completion that happens before March 20th is the quietest one of all. A shift in how a person relates to their own inner voice. Many people enter this retrograde period half listening to themselves, trusting their intuition in theory, but overriding it in practice, beginning to feel something and then immediately explaining it away. By the time the retrograde closes, something about that dynamic tends to have rearranged itself. Not perfectly, not permanently, but noticeably. The inner voice that was easy to dismiss in January feels by the equinox a little harder to ignore, a little more familiar, a little more like something worth returning to, again and again, in the quiet spaces ordinary life keeps offering. The retrograde will end, Mercury will move forward again, and the world will pick up its usual pace, the calendar filling, the inbox accumulating, the forward momentum of ordinary life resuming with all its noise and color. But something of what these 23 days offered will remain. Not as a memory exactly, but as a new interior arrangement, a slightly different relationship to a feeling you thought was fixed, a small but real opening where there used to be a closing. Elise Chandler has said that the value of these quiet windows is not in what they produce, but in what they allow. They allow the parts of us that cannot speak at full speed to finally say what they have been forming for a long time. And most of us, if we're honest, have been carrying something that needed that kind of room. March 20th will arrive the way spring always does, not all at once, but in accumulations of small warmth. A single afternoon that smells different, a morning that arrives earlier than you expected. And whatever you allowed to surface, to soften, to complete itself during these quiet weeks between the end of February and the equinox, will be waiting there, settled and ready, like something you set down carefully and found exactly where you left it. There is no rush tonight. The process has its own timing, and it is already, in its own gentle way, well underway.